Brilliant. I'm just going to basically start off by introducing Lyndsay this webinar event as well. So hi everyone, thanks for joining on your lunch break, or if some of you've just woken up having a chilled morning and deciding to come along and talk to us and listen to Lyndsay. So Lyndsay is a personal friend of mine. I've known her since university, so she kindly offered to do this webinar with us. For those of you who have spoken to me, you'll know that I've lived in China for 3 years, and that's kind of partly how Lyndsay actually managed to get to China, which she'll go into in a wee bit. But where I didn't actually teach myself, Lyndsay has taught, so which is why I thought it would be really great to have her come on, talk about her experience, and her experience is also quite recent as well. She was teaching from 2019 to 2021, which some of you listening may be like, what? Weren't we in a pandemic? Like, how did you manage that?
Yeah.
So I'll let Lyndsay get into that. But I just felt it'd be really useful for you guys to hear from someone who's done it recently. One other really important thing I should mention is that Lyndsay did her job in China, her teaching in China through an agency. So she didn't go through this exact program. So I'm also here to answer program specific questions. So Lyndsay's experience, while there's a lot you can take away from it in terms of what it was like when she first went over, teaching, etc. Some of kind of her experience with her agency will be different to how we will do it on our program, but she'll kind of highlight where things might be different during her talk. So in terms of the structure, she's going to have a PowerPoint presentation, kind of going over everything, some tips, tricks, what it was like for her, and then we'll open up to question and answer. So at the bottom, you should hopefully see the Q&A function or the chat function. You can ask questions anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll get to them at the end. But yeah, any questions at all, even if they're program related, I can answer those ones, or anything about teaching specifically or what it was like for Lyndsay, go ahead and ask. But yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I hope you enjoy listening to Lyndsay's experience, but I'll just pass it over to Lyndsay if you want to.
Yeah, I'll just share my screen. Okay, share screen. Okay. So hopefully you can all see my little PowerPoint presentation. So yeah, hi, my name is Lyndsay. As Natalie mentioned, I was an English teacher in China for 2 years, and I met Natalie at university. So today I'm just going to give you a little bit of an insight into what life is like as an English teacher in China. Just kind of piggybacking off of what Natalie said about going through an agency, I can already tell you that Pagoda Project is doing more for you than my agency ever did for me. So I would not recommend going through an agency, and that will become apparent kind of throughout. Why? So basically, some of the content of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to give you a little bit of background, how I came to the decision to move to China, because I know some of you are still in that decision-making process and are just needing that sort of like final push to kind of push you to go. It's a really big decision to make. So I thought it'd be interesting to tell you kind of where my kind of decision came from. I'm then going to talk about arriving in China, like what my visa process was like. Both times I went to China, because I had to go through the visa process twice. A typical day in the life of what it's like to be a teacher, what the schedule's like, what the social life is like. I'm going to give you a few tips, preparation, and then I'll open the floor to questions. I'll also just tell you, I put my Instagram at the end as well. Feel free, if you think of a question later, you can message me on Instagram. I'm always happy to talk about my experience in China. Okay, so there's me and Natalie in Hong Kong. So my background is I did a degree in politics at the University of Edinburgh, which is where I met Natalie. We actually bonded over our struggle in Spanish grammar class, and discovered we actually grew up about 10 minutes away from each other in the west of Scotland. So Natalie was studying Chinese, and through her I met more and more people who were interested in China, and kind of learned a little bit through almost like osmosis. Throughout university, I was and still am a very avid traveller. I interrailed solo. I spent my summers au pairing in Spain. So I knew that when I was looking at jobs for graduation and plans for graduation, I knew that travel was going to be really high on my priority list. Just a note here though, some of the people I met working in China had never been outside of the UK. China had been their first experience of traveling abroad. So you definitely don't need to be a travel expert to immigrate to China and be successful in that. And I would say actually working in China as a teacher is one of the easiest ways to get more experience in traveling. And China is really a hub for the rest of Asia in terms of travel, and I was able to travel a lot in my time there. So as I said, Natalie and I were really good friends at university. So when she planned a year at Peking University, I knew that this was like a great excuse, a great chance to go and travel in China. So I booked a flight, flew into Beijing, and I flew out of Hong Kong. And then I phoned Natalie, proceeded to tell her, I'm like, coming to China for 6 weeks. To which she then replied that I was an absolute psycho and this was a crazy idea. I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be. 6 weeks with no bank account, no knowledge of Chinese, no like the language or the culture. It was going to be really tough. I was excited nonetheless, and Natalie was a huge help to set me up with a phone, kind of teach me very, very basic Chinese to kind of survive and just make sure that I didn't die in my first few days in China. And in absolutely no time, I completely fell in love with China as a country. And this is where I started to have a little bit of a grad life crisis. I was sitting on a train in Shanghai and I realized that I was running out of time. I had the sensation that I just didn't have enough time in China and I needed more time. I needed to be in China. And a desk job that I had lined up back home was sounding less and less appealing as the days went on. So when I returned to Scotland, it was almost kismet in that I was contacted by Graduate Recruitment Bureau who were hiring for agencies to teach in China. So I took the leap. I applied. My application process was laughably quite easy. I had to answer maybe 3 questions on English grammar, send a video of myself, and I got offered a job. But that's kind of how agencies work. They take anything with a pulse. And yeah, it's not a great experience being hired through an agency. But yeah, so I took the leap, I applied, and I was offered a job in China. Sorry, my throat is really... Okay, so arriving in China, I had 2 very unique experiences with the Chinese arrival and visa process, because the first year I went to China was right in the middle of the Hong Kong protests. And the second time that I went through the visa and arrival process was right in the middle of COVID. So it can be quite confusing, but here's a quick timeline of my time in China. So I moved to China in September of 2019, through to January of 2020, which was the Spring Festival holiday. So I went traveling around Asia. I went to Spain to visit my family, and we all know what happened in January of 2020. So I was locked out of China. Essentially, they shut the border. I had 1 suitcase with me and 1 backpack. All of my stuff was in China. All my life was in China. I was one of the lucky ones who had brought my laptop with me, but some of my colleagues were not as lucky. We left our entire life thinking that we're going on holiday, and we got locked out. So I was still employed through my school, obviously, and there were the Chinese government implemented some laws to protect those of us who had been stuck outside China, so that we couldn't be fired because of being stuck outside of China. All my British colleagues were in the same boat as well, so we all really were able to kind of stick together. This is a period in time that I really did not enjoy being employed through an agency. They were incredibly difficult to work with in this time. So yeah, we eventually set up some online lessons with our students and worked on getting back out to China. And it took until October of 2020 for me to return to China. Then I stayed until July of 2021. And that's when I left China for good, which was very sad. So year 1, I had a lot of agency help to get through the visa process in my first year, which is what I would say would be like a typical year typical experience of getting through the Chinese visa process to work. I knew absolutely nothing. I got on a plane, I didn't have a visa, I arrived in Hong Kong, and I just kind of like went along with the process. It was all kind of sorted for me. We flew as a cohort, a few of my colleagues and myself from London. We flew to Hong Kong and drove across the border to Shenzhen. We had our visas sorted at the border. The crossing the border was a little bit different than normal just because of the Hong Kong situation that was going on at the time. We got our SIM cards bought right at the border. We proceeded to a nearby hospital to do the required health checks, the most thorough health check I have ever had in my life. And it all just seemed like a blur. I was very jet lagged. And then eventually, once we had been in Shenzhen for what felt like 5 days, but in reality was probably about 2 hours, we started to make our way to the school that I would call home for the next 2 years. My school was called Humen Foreign Language School. It's on Weiyuan Island, which is in the outskirts of Dongguan. So Dongguan is a city in between Guangzhou and Shenzhen, which are both big tier 1 or 2 cities, and then Dongguan's this little tier 3 city in the middle. And I lived in the outskirts, way in the like really rural, but I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with it so quickly, and it really did become my home. So my school was a very large private boarding school, which I think Natalie said would be different to kind of the experience that you guys would be going through working with public schools. But yeah, I was quite lucky. My school was large. There was a lot of other foreign teachers there. There was a really big focus on English. There was around 25 other foreign teachers from the UK, Philippines, Canada, and India. And a group of us had arrived. We're all kind of the same age. We were all traveling together, all in the same experience. So we became a really, really close-knit group, and they're still some of my absolute closest friends in the world. We try and meet up once a year in London, since we're all back in the UK, except for one who's still out in China. In terms of visa, the school then took over my visa process. So the process is turning your Z visa into a residence permit, which allows you to enter and exit China as you wish. The Z visa is basically a single entry visa that you apply for, which is like you are declaring to the Chinese government that you're entering China with the intention to work. And on arrival, you have 30 days then to change that into a residency permit by going to a police station. This is where I want to say my school was so helpful, so welcoming. They really surrounded us with a lot of love and appreciation right from the get-go, and helping us get settled. They really couldn't have done more, and I think that just kind of sets the tone for Chinese people in general. And I would be really surprised if you guys didn't have a similar experience with your schools. They really were couldn't do enough for us. Like, they were just the nicest, most helpful people. And I would imagine that any school would be exactly the same. Other foreign teachers that I've spoken to who work at different schools have been able to say the exact same experience, that their school was really, really helpful. There was one person at my school who was kind of our designated visa person, and she had all of our documentation. She got it all sorted and took us to the police station and helped translate and all the sort of bureaucratic stuff. She also helped us get a bank account and open our bank accounts, which meant that we could then have WeChat Pay, we could get paid in China. And I think those were open within a couple of days of us arriving. We got them really, really soon. I'd also mention here, I was provided with accommodation on campus, which was standard at my school. Every teacher lived on campus. But I have heard of other schools who provide an allowance to teachers to help them with accommodation or some form of support in finding a flat, getting their utilities sorted. So it is pretty standard in China to get some sort of accommodation support. So yeah, I would expect that your guys' schools would also offer you some kind of accommodation support. Year 2, 2020, arriving in China was very, very different. So the second time I had to go through the visa process, my residency permit had expired. So my residency permit expired in July of 2020, which meant I had to reapply for a Z visa. But I couldn't go through Hong Kong again, because if I went through Hong Kong, I'd have to quarantine in Hong Kong, cross the border, quarantine in China, and it was going to be really, really expensive. So I had to fly to mainland China this time, even though Hong Kong was my closest international airport. So I did the online Z visa application, which I'm sure some of you are probably worried about. Don't be, it's really quite easy. It's just a lot of information and can be a little bit time consuming when doing it all. I was quite lucky that my agency were trying to get a PU letter for me, and it was kind of a really long process, but then they very suddenly said that you didn't need it anymore if you were reapplying for a Z visa. So the people who wanted to return just like rushed back into China. So my first visa application at Edinburgh didn't go well. I got sent my work permit card from China, which I then had to take to the visa center, and they didn't have a card reader for it. So they wanted a notarized like piece of paper documentation that came with it that my agency wouldn't give me. It was a whole debacle, which I did not like working with my agency for this, because they were withholding a lot of my necessary documentations. So I then went down to London, who had the card reader, and eventually got my Z visa. I don't know if you guys care about like the cost of visas or stuff. Generally, the Z visa costs about £150. If you get it expedited, it's about £180, which my agency did not cover the cost of for year 2. So I have a lot of animosity towards them. Anyway, I got on a flight, a really expensive flight, and got to China. I was immediately taken into a hotel quarantine for 2 weeks. Really, really fun. It honestly wasn't that bad. You'll hear horror stories of people talking about the Chinese quarantine and the food, and honestly, it was fine. It was, it was 2 weeks in a hotel room. It wasn't the end of the world compared to the freedom and normality of life that I got in China afterwards. So it's just something that you definitely need to be aware of that is still in place in China. When you're booking your flights and stuff, different areas have different different quarantine on arrival regulations. So I would look into kind of where you're flying to and what the restrictions are there. There's a few really good Facebook groups, Foreigners Stuck Outside China. It's a really good one. They track flights and quarantine and update a lot of stuff like that, if you're interested. And the cost of the cost of the quarantine was around 4,700 RMB, but my agency gave me about 3,000 RMB to help towards it. There are more expensive ones, there are cheaper ones. I didn't get to pick, but some places you do get to pick based on cost. And along with that, I was also reimbursed £450 on my flight, which wasn't a lot considering how expensive it was to fly during the pandemic. The flight costs have been steadily coming down for the past sort of year or so. So it's obviously costs that you need to be aware of that exist. But yeah, the restrictions don't look to be going anywhere anytime soon. So definitely just be aware that it might be something that you need to think of when you're making your choice of where to fly and things like that. Okay, so a typical day in the life of a teacher, in terms of like work. So I taught in high school. I taught IELTS preparation classes. The IELTS is the International English Language Testing System. It's an English exam for foreign students who want to study in the UK or the USA. I also taught some general English classes. So my school kind of operated in it was like two schools in one school. So there was the Chinese curriculum school and the Cambridge system school. Like all the foreign teachers taught in the Cambridge system school. I actually taught in both high schools. And the high school age in China is around 15 to 19. So they're a little bit older. It's like the 3 years of high school, or the last 3 years of school. They're a year older than typical UK high school students. So most of my classes were speaking. I operated from a couple of different textbooks through my time there as well, but the curriculum was always provided for me. But I also was given quite a lot of freedom in terms of finding my own resources as well. If I didn't like the resources in the book, I was given a lot of guidance in terms of what to expect in the IELTS examination. I became a bit of an expert on what questions were coming up and what topics were coming up. And I really felt like I was able to kind of get my teeth into teaching, because I had literally no experience teaching before. None, no experience at all. And I'd actually love to tell you about my first ever lesson. Oh man, it was awful. So I turned up at the school. I arrived on, say, like the Friday, and our first day of work was going to be the Monday. And I had met with my manager and a couple of other people on the Friday night. And they were like, don't need to worry about Monday. We'll just like introduce you to the classes and you'll kind of get like what you're doing. And like it was going to be like a soft entrance into the world of teaching. I was like, oh, okay, great. So I then showed up to work on Monday morning. I was the first ever foreign teacher that they had in the Chinese department high school. So they were quite like excited about how I was going to teach and how it was going to be different. And I got to my class, I like was introduced to the class, and then my manager just kind of looked at me and went, okay, off you go. And all of my colleagues were sat at the back. It was a class of 50 students. And I was just like, I have nothing prepared. I have absolutely nothing prepared. So yeah, we struggled through that one a little bit. But it was kind of like baptism by fire. I felt really like nothing could go worse than that afterwards. But they were all, my colleagues who came and watched were all really, really lovely. And they are genuinely just glad that you are there, and that they really appreciate that you've chosen their country to go to as well. That is, I kind of got that vibe a lot of the time when I met my colleagues. They were really honoured that you had thought to come to China. So yeah, anyway, a typical day for me started around 6:45, which is a little bit early, but I really got into the routine of it. My apartment was on campus, so I could get to school really, really quickly. And I would make my way there around 7:30. My first classes for foreign teachers were 7:45. But most days I wasn't teaching first period, so I'd go kind of get breakfast at the cafeteria. We were provided 3 meals a day at the cafeteria. It was pretty typical Chinese food. The morning was like baozi and noodles, different types of bun and bread. Lunchtime, we typically had like rice, and then you picked 3 different dishes to go with your rice. And it was all really, really typical, authentic Chinese food. Which I really liked, because it was nice to get a sense of what was normal to eat there. Yeah, so and it was a nice way to like meet my colleagues outside of school time as well. So after breakfast, I'd head up to my office, which I shared with my Chinese colleagues, which is where I spent most of my time. And it was great to spend time with them. One of my colleagues even began to teach me Chinese. I speak no Chinese. I do not say I speak any Chinese. My colleague Tango was very, very patient with me and tried to teach me, but it's really hard and I was not good at it. But yeah, you can definitely survive in China without knowing Chinese. the area I lived in as well, they spoke both Mandarin and Cantonese. So even if I tried to speak in one of them, the person might have not spoke Cantonese, or they might have not spoke Mandarin, and it was just very, they sometimes mixed the words mid-sentence as well. So yeah, I did really try, but you do pick up a lot that you just, from hearing other people and how they interact. So with taxi drivers, I knew how to talk to them and give them directions and things like that, just from being in a taxi with some of my Chinese friends. So yeah, I wouldn't worry if you don't speak any Chinese. You can definitely live. I lived in literally the middle of nowhere countryside and didn't speak a word of Chinese. So I definitely wouldn't worry about that. Typically, I had about 3 or 4 classes a day. I think my maximum was 22 teaching hours a week. But I also covered some maternity cover in my first year, so I think I did 24 hours my first year for like 1 semester. But we got a long lunch break in the middle of the day between 11:30 and 2:30, and then the day finished at 5 o'clock, which is when we got into social life. Socializing is a big part of life in China, and I'm sure it's something that you've all kind of thought about. I found my work-life balance in China was really fantastic. I was able to get most of my work done in a sort of typical day. I never brought work home, really. Maybe once or twice if I had a lot of work to do, or a lot of class to prepare, or extra stuff to do. But generally, I was able to leave my work at work and go out and enjoy life with my friends. So we typically got invited out with Chinese colleagues would take us out, and quickly they would become friends. So we've had a lot of dinners, movies, KTV, which is karaoke. I also joined a gym in the town with some of my other foreign teacher friends. Weekends were free for exploring. We traveled. Some of my favorite memories are being invited to one of my colleagues' house over a spring festival to make dumplings, and I loved being able to travel with some of my colleagues. We went to Yangshuo. So I've put a few pictures up of kind of this is one of my classes. This is my grade 10. They were my grade 10 and my grade 11 class. They're not usually this well behaved. This was for advertising. They were getting filmed for advertising. So they're all sat very nicely. But they were really good fun, one of my favorite classes. This is in my first year. We did lots of like extracurricular events at the school. This was the English dubbing contest, where they had to pick a scene from a movie and then speak the parts of it. It was really, really fun. And they all really enjoyed it. This is me and some of my foreign friends in Yangshuo. We went just one weekend on the train, and it was really fantastic, a great experience. And this is what my school looked like. It was a really, really big school. So this is just the high school buildings. But it was really a nice place to live with not lots of nature. And yeah, it was really wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to move on to tips and preparation. So I've kind of split this into a couple of different sections. I've compiled a list of must-have apps and websites as a teacher in China, what you need to have, in my experience anyway. So we'll go left to right. So first one over here, WeChat. I'm sure all of you have heard of WeChat, but I cannot stress how much WeChat is used in China. It's used for everything. It's used for your banking, messaging, paying for things, ordering things, buying train tickets, booking hotels. This app does everything. So if you haven't got it set up yet, I really would encourage you to get it set up, because sometimes the authentication process can take a little while. But once you have it up and running, it's the best app in the whole world. This is Meituan or Waimai. I'm not 100% sure what the real name of it is. Some of my friends called it the kangaroo app. It's basically like Just Eat, but delivering food in China is a huge part of life in China. It's incredibly cheap. Most people don't cook because it's cheaper to order food. You can also order things like medicine from a pharmacy, toiletries, groceries, all through this app. It's so quick and so easy to use. The next one over here is VPN. You really do need to have a VPN in China. I've heard of some people going without one, and it's, as an English teacher, you need to have access to a lot of resources that are not able to be used with the firewall that's in China. So I would really recommend getting a VPN. I used Express personally. It worked okay. We always used to joke that Express would go down whenever there was a bad protest in Hong Kong, because we were so close to the border that they would block, put like extra blocks on. So it would cut out quite a lot, but my second year it was there, it worked fine. I've heard Surfshark is very good as well, and Nord seems to work fine. There's probably also some free VPNs. Do some research, get some recommendations, and see what kind of works for you. But I would definitely recommend at least getting one VPN. I had Express, and then I had a free one called VPN 360 that was a good backup in case it didn't work. Didi, basically Uber, but very, very cheap. It can be a little bit tricky to download this app outside of China. Make sure you download Didi Greater China. You might need to change your address in the App Store to a Chinese address in order to download it. But after that, it kind of works fine. It's just sometimes a little bit tricky. If you have an Android, I think it's a lot easier. You can just download it from their website. Bilibili and Youku are the equivalent of YouTube and Netflix, but Youku costs about £2 a month, and there's loads of really good films and stuff on there if you are worried about your VPN not working with Netflix and stuff like that. It's a good alternative to know. This is an absolute must-have for teachers, a YouTube converter. A lot of the reason that foreign teachers are so sought after in China is to bring elements of culture to the classroom and to teach about British or American or Australian culture. So a lot of the time, the teachers in the department that you work for will want you to show the students music. They want you to show them TV shows or movies or videos about the culture that they're learning about. And those can be really, really hard to find on Chinese websites like Bilibili or Youku. So I would recommend using a YouTube converter, getting used to at least using one. I used Y2Mate, and I never had any problems with it. And I used it to download hundreds and hundreds of videos over 2 years. I would also, if you can't find a way to download with subtitles, there is one. I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called. There's one that you can download, Save Subs. It's called Save Subs. You can download the YouTube video and the subtitles together if you're worried about your students not being able to understand. You can also make your own subtitles through Descript, and they are, you just like put it through the process and then it comes out with a script, and you might need to go back and like check some of it because it's obviously automated, and change it, and you can download it as subtitles in a file to play at the same time. So yeah, that's a good sort of tip or trick if you need to use a lot of videos in your classes. And then the last one I recommend is Baopals or Taobao. They're the same website. It's essentially like Amazon. You can buy anything on these websites. Baopals is the English mirror website of Taobao, which is the Chinese one. So most of the things on the two sites cost the same. Sometimes one is a little more expensive than the other, but generally it's about the same. I always use Baopals because I can't speak or type or anything in Chinese, but if you can, Taobao is also there to help you practice. Yeah, awesome. Okay. Money. So this is the one that Natalie said people had the most questions about. So I've put my paycheck kind of on for everyone to see. So I wouldn't be too afraid of this. This is my second year paycheck. I couldn't actually find any paychecks from the first year that I worked in China. They're all on my old laptop. So this is kind of gives you an idea of what to expect tax-wise and the cost of things. So I always was given a basic pay of 3,000 RMB, so I could be off the entire month and still get that 3,000 RMB. And then I also got lecture remuneration. I can never say that word. Remuneration. And it was worked out that each month we worked 21.75 days. So if we had a holiday in that month, it was deducted from those 21.75 days, and it came off of our lecture remuneration. I got a bonus every month for perfect attendance, no lateness, all that sort of stuff. And then my tax each month was around 240 to 250 RMB, which is about 24, 25 pounds. So pretty low. My first year I was in China, I earned 9,000 RMB. And it was around 200 RMB in taxes. So each month I was taking home 8,800 RMB, which was at that time almost equivalent, perfectly equivalent to 1,000 pounds. As I mentioned before, my accommodation was provided. So I don't really know a lot about the cost of accommodation in China, but I'm sure Natalie can help you recommend some sort of websites with any sort of information on that. But I would say the cost of living in China compared to the UK is extremely low. On both paychecks, like 8,800 or 14,258, I was able to live really, really, really comfortably. I was able to travel a lot. My first year that I lived in China, I went to Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore. I flew back to Spain. I was able to live really comfortably on both paychecks. The only costs that I kind of had to cover by myself were my phone, which was approximately 80 RMB for about 20 gigabytes a month. And that was just a kind of top up system that you did through WeChat. Tax, which was it was never more than 250 RMB per month in my experience. And then a food shop, roughly 250 RMB per week. It really depends on if you're eating at the school, if you're eating out more often, but generally, a week it would be about 250 RMB. So I was able to save a lot of money and live really comfortably through this paycheck. And this is the agency I went through, if anyone's wondering. I really don't recommend them. They take a huge cut of your pay as well, which I never got to see. But Natalie mentioned that this was kind of what most people had questions about in terms of if you'd earn enough money to live. Absolutely, yes. It's very, very cheap to live in China. So I wouldn't really worry about your pay or anything. And tax is really low as well. Okay, so just some closing remarks. The most important tip that I have for anyone moving to China is to jump in with an open mind. You will get culture shock. You will find it hard. You will be pushed outside your comfort zone, but you will ultimately grow so much as a person. It has been by far one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, being able to call China home for a while. The person that I have become through spending those 2 years in China is stronger, more resilient, a more global citizen, more open-minded. It's really impressive to talk about with employers as well now. Whenever I mention to someone that I lived in China for 2 years, they're really excited to hear about it. So it's definitely something that I will carry with me through my whole life. And I'm absolutely full of love for a country that's on the other side of the world. I've made lifelong friends through this process. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to share my story with you all today. I've just got a few pictures. This is me in my school for our school picture day. I'm right in the middle. This is me enjoying some weekend traveling. And this was the first year that I was there was the 75 years of China the Communist Party in China or something like that. So they did a lot of stuff like this. So if you have any questions, or you think of something after the Q&A is finished, or you're watching this recorded, this is my Instagram. Feel free to drop me a message. You can look through some of my pictures. I have loads of pictures of China. Oh, and Natalie mentioned that some of you were worried about Christmas. This is me spending Christmas with my students last year, or this is Christmas Eve rather. I got Christmas off at my school, just one day though. And we, I think, had to work it back sometimes. But they definitely make you feel like surrounded by love, because they understand that it's difficult to be away from family at a time like Christmas, and they really enjoy getting to learn about part of your culture as well. So this is my students having their Christmas Eve party, and inviting me along to spend it with them. And okay, should we open the floor to some questions? I see there's like 8.
Yes.
At the top of the screen. Yeah.
First of all, thank you, Lyndsay. That was fantastic. I asked Lyndsay because she's very good at giving her unfiltered opinion on things. So I just felt like, you know, it's all well and good hearing from us about China, what it's like. As a lot of you will know, a lot of Pagoda staff have worked and lived in China at some point, but it's always good to hear from someone else. So yes, thanks, Lyndsay. That's fantastic. And I also love that you felt the need to point yourself out in that picture. I mean, you can spot you from a mile away with the blonde hair.
Yeah, I did definitely stick out, like if there were a lot of the time in China. It took a while to get used to the stairs and pictures and things like that, but it's all part of the fun and part of the experience.
Feeling like a celebrity when you're out
a
there.
little bit, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I've got some videos of me like being grabbed by children, and it was a very surreal experience.
It is a weird one. It's something you'll all get used to when you get there. But yes, let's definitely open it up to the Q&A. Lyndsay, if you want to stop sharing your screen, I'll pop your details as well in the chat. Someone has asked, how many hours a week were you teaching? Obviously, one thing to clarify as well before you start is, again, just to remind everyone that Lyndsay went through an agency, so was not on this program. A lot of her experience will be specific to the school that she was at, which was also a private school. So you guys are all applying to go to state schools. And also another thing I want to mention is that accommodation is included in this program, so don't have to worry about that. That is included and inclusive. But yes, Lyndsay, if you want to talk about how many weeks roughly in your experience at your school were you working a week in class teaching?
Okay. In class time, like I said, it was 3 to 4 classes a day, no more than 22 hours per week, which was on my contract. I did cover some maternity leave the first year that I was there, so I was working 24 hours a week for roughly 3 or 4 weeks kind of before the spring festival holiday, but I did get paid a bit more for that as well. But yeah, I think my second year I was there, I was on 20 hours a week. But yeah, I was in working like the whole day kind of thing in my office. But it was quite nice to have kind of those periods that you were on and periods that you were off, because it meant that I could do a lot of my preparation work in the office, and I never really had to bring work home with me, which was quite nice for like a work-life balance. But yeah, it was about 20 hours per week.
Brilliant, fantastic. So again, that will kind of depend on you guys where you are, but what we tell you guys is between 16 to 25 in class actually teaching, and then the rest is kind of up to you how you manage your time, how you like to lesson plan and whatnot.
Oh yeah, I could sit in my office and watch Netflix if I wanted to. Like, no one was going to tell me what to do with that time, but it just meant that I would then have to take work home to prepare it. So I chose to manage my time kind of in the office. But yeah, about 20 hours teaching.
Cool. All right. So someone else also asked, did you manage to make friends at the school? Were there any other foreigners at your school?
Yeah, so I was really lucky that my school was really large. There was about 25 other foreign teachers at my school. We were all kind of in the same age range. We were all kind of like early 20s, just graduated. So it was kind of like being back at uni dorms again when we were living in our accommodation. But my second year I was there was only me and 2 other foreign teachers who had managed to get back into the country. So it was very different. But I made so many friends with my Chinese colleagues as well. And I just felt like I was able to like spend more time with them, and they were just so lovely, and I miss them so much. But some of my best friends I met when I was in China, like really, really close friends.
China definitely brings you closer to
Yeah,
everyone around you.
like yeah, you become close to your foreign friends because you're all going through this sort of crazy experience together. But at the same time, I made friends with Chinese people as well. They were so, I feel like I keep saying this, but I cannot stress it enough how lovely and welcoming every single Chinese person that I met was. I don't like to generalize, but every single person was so nice and so lovely and really, really wanted you to feel welcome in their country. So I would say it's really easy to make friends in China. Yeah.
It's good to know.
Also, if you're just like out as well and you see another foreign person, more than likely you will start talking to them because you're like, you're also foreign. Like, what do you do? Where do you live? What are you like? You kind of bond with other foreign people because most of them are there to teach English as well. But yeah, I met some friends like just out for dinner and we spotted this other group of foreign people and we're like, hi, where are you from? What do you do? Because you're all going through that crazy experience of living in China.
Yeah, definitely. I can relate to that. That's
Yeah.
exactly what it was like for me. So I think I say to a lot of you guys, like, to find the other foreigners in your city, just go to the foreign bar. They'll be there. Like
Yeah.
that, they're super easy and super friendly as well, just
Yeah.
because everyone's in this weird experience. But on accommodation, you mentioned you were living with the other foreigners in the school. So someone else has
Yeah.
asked, what was your accommodation like? Again, just to kind of preface that, every school will be different, but what was your experience in your accommodation?
Yeah, so I was given a 2-person flat. I shared with one of the other foreign teachers. They put us all in this one big building, and we just took up this entire building. So I shared with another girl called Tally the first year that I lived there. We had our own bedrooms, which I feel like is pretty standard. I don't think I've ever seen anyone in China like sharing a bedroom. So I would almost guarantee you're going to get your own bedroom. Yeah, I can see Natalie nodding. So yeah. And then we had a quite big living room area, which was really good for like having gatherings and parties. And yeah, we had a lot of like social events. There was very few nights that I was by myself. There was always something going on within our little community. And I also had a kitchen with some facilities. And like a balcony area as well. I had like 2 balconies, one for washing and one for like sitting and enjoying. And then the second year I was there, they built new accommodation. We chose to stay in our old flats just because we didn't want to move everything. But the new accommodation was like like a dorm room almost with like a kitchen outside and a big balcony. And they were like 1-person dorms as well.
I'm on mute. Hello. Fantastic. So again, I can definitely say all of you will get your own room for sure. But the rest is something that you can ask us when you get to the interview stage. So Robert has asked, why did you leave China and do you plan on returning?
Ooh, I get asked that almost daily at this point, yeah. So for me, I left China for a few reasons. As I think I've tried to kind of explain to you guys, it is a difficult place to live at times. I love it with all my heart, but I don't speak any Chinese. So it was very difficult to kind of go about my day-to-day at times. Not that you need to be able to speak Chinese to live there, but it does make it easier if you learn the basics. I also left the UK with a boyfriend. So I was in a long distance relationship for 2 years and still with him, thankfully. But it was obviously very difficult to be in that situation as well, doing long distance for so long. And I think as well, I always thought I was the type of person who never ever gets homesick, but it does happen. You definitely start to feel a bit like, oh, I just want to be able to hug my mom, or I want to be able to go to family parties or spend Christmas with my family. So a lot of those things kind of factored into my decision. And when I was deciding on whether I was going to do another year or not, I was kind of weighing up if I could do another year in a long distance relationship, if I could spend another year away from my family, because obviously with COVID, I couldn't pop in and out like I had been able to the first year that I lived there. So I had to really weigh up if this was something that I could do, and it ultimately came down to I had the experience that I wanted to have. I had spent a lot of time in China. I had been able to gain a lot of skills as a teacher. I had been able to explore a lot of the country, and I felt kind of complete. I had completed my experience that I wanted to have. So yeah, and also, I mean, I'm going to badmouth my agency a bit more. Which, so my agency, they weren't offering to up my pay by an awful lot if I stayed. Which obviously I was like, oh, well, I'm 2 years experienced teacher now, and I wanted to be paid a little bit more, and I wanted to essentially get rid of my agency because once I was in China, they did nothing. Like there was no kind of support for us through the agency. So I was kind of like, why are they taking such a large part of my paycheck if that I'm never getting to see? Because I had asked the school, kind of like, how much do they take, or like, do they still get paid? They were still getting paid when we were stuck not teaching for COVID. They were still getting paid. They were still taking our money. So I was kind of getting a bit annoyed with my agency and how terrible they were to us during the COVID situation. So if I wanted to stay at my school, I had to stay with my agency, and I was open to staying at my school, but I wasn't open to staying with my agency, essentially. Because yeah, in China, there's very few regulations to do with teacher agencies. It's a bit like the Wild West. There's so little limitations that the Chinese government puts on these agencies. So I think the fact that you guys are going to state schools, you're going to have way more like rights as employees than I did, and going through an agency like Pagoda Projects, Natalie's told me kind of like her experience working with them, and I've worked with them as a volunteer, like mentor thing, and the people on their programs all seem really, really well supported, and yeah, I just never got that from my agency. So it was another kind of reason why I wanted to leave, was not to work with my agency anymore.
Would you go back to China?
Would I go back to China? I weigh up this is a daily struggle in my head. Would I go back to China? I would 100% go back to visit and see my friends. My boyfriend and I are planning to travel to Japan at some point in the near future, and I'm like, we could go via China and stop in and see some of my friends. Yeah, I would 100% go back to visit. To work, maybe. I would never say never. I would love to, because I absolutely loved my job. I loved my life there. I would never say never, but it's not really in my pipeline at the moment.
Very diplomatic answer, but I see what you mean now. After years in China, I'm quite happy to be home, but I do miss it, even if I just got to go over for a few weeks or something.
Yeah.
So in your when you were speaking, you mentioned that you felt that employers were interested to hear about your experience in China. So someone has asked, do you think you have become more employable from doing this program? If you want to dig into that a little bit, talk about.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think every job interview that I've had since coming home to the UK, a huge part of being able to talk about my experience in work has been being able to talk about my experience in China. And that is something that employers are really interested in and always do tend to ask you more about, because I think it makes you look like a very adaptable person. It makes you look like a resilient person, a person who's open to trying new things, and these are all things that employers are really interested in seeing, and you have great examples of being able to show them that I am I'm an open-minded person. I am a person who is resilient. I am a person who takes risks and works hard and can yeah, it's a great example that I pretty much every job interview I've done since being back, I have spoken about my experience in China, both as a teacher and as just an experience in general. And I work I haven't even told you like what I do now. So I work for a charity called Cyrenians in Edinburgh, and it's working with young people, helping them find work experience opportunities. And then also I work as an EFL teacher online, so teaching English online as well, because I did my CELTA after I left China, which is a teaching English qualification. But yeah, finding both those jobs was huge part of finding both of those jobs was being able to talk about my experience in China.
Brilliant. That's great to hear. Yeah, I think a lot of these experiences, if you're able to pinpoint the transferable skills that you've got from it, if education is not necessarily what you want to do, there's still things that you can take from this experience that make you more appealing to future job applications, etc. So Fargal asked, thanks for sharing your story. It was very interesting. Were you able to pick which visa suited you? You mentioned you were able to travel outside of China and then return and visit countries such as Vietnam, Cambodia, and Spain.
Yes. So no, I was not able to pick my visa. I got told which visa to get. I think when I traveled, I was on the L visa. So I went to visit Natalie. I was on a tourist visa, and it was a multi-entry visa. So I was able to enter and exit China. But with the Z visa, I think that's the only visa that you can enter and able to work, especially as a teacher. It's one of the most difficult ones to get in terms of just like getting all your ducks in a row kind of thing. But the visa centers are so helpful, and I'm sure like Pagoda Projects provides help for some visa stuff. Natalie, I'm not sure.
So actually, Robert, also thanks for your question, asked that how much help does Pagoda offer with sorting out your visa? So essentially we signpost where you'll need to go. So there's 3 main visa application centres in the UK, China ones, in Edinburgh, Manchester, and London. And basically we'll just tell you which visa you need to get. And then it's, in terms of what Lyndsay was saying, it's pretty much, you just need to get together those documents and turn up. If you want us to kind of help you with that process, we can do, but for an additional cost. But for the most part, like Lyndsay, maybe you can talk about, because I know you did the visa application the second time, how that was for you.
Yeah, the visa application the second time was pretty easy actually, which so that's just a form that you fill in online. You fill in a form to get your appointment as well. So like I said, I went to Edinburgh and London because my Edinburgh visa got rejected, which was entirely my agency's fault. So yeah, essentially it's just making sure that you have all your documentation in place. I think all the visa centers websites have a checklist just to make sure that you have everything in place. There's small things that you might forget about. You need like extra passport pictures and copies of your passport, and just making sure that you have all that. That's the most difficult part. The actual forms themselves are very straightforward. A little time consuming in terms of just like, it's a lot of information that you need to fill in. But once you have it, is like once you have everything kind of prepared, it's literally just a case of going into the visa center and giving them all the stuff, and they like tell you to come back in a few days. So yeah, I found it like pretty straightforward every time that I've had to do the visa process. And yeah, in terms of like the transferring the Z visa to the resident permit, I would put money down that your school would help you with that, because it involves going to like the police station. But once you have that resident permit, that is what allows you to enter and exit China. Obviously right now it is very different because of COVID. If you exit China, it's hard A, to get back in, and then B, you have to go through quarantine again. So my second year in China, I did not leave China between the October and the July. I didn't leave China at all, just because there was still a lot of quarantine in place. I traveled a lot within China. China is a huge country. There's so much to see. So I went like to Chengdu and Chongqing. I showed you some pictures. I went to Yangshuo. I've been to like Beijing and Shanghai and Xi'an and Suzhou and loads of different places. And I barely scratched the surface on where you can go in China. I would 100% go back and travel to more places in China. So if you're worried about not being able to enter and exit China, I really wouldn't be. There's so much to see and do in China itself, and traveling within China is fairly cheap. The trains are really excellent. So yeah, it's a difficult one because yes, it does allow you to enter and exit into China, but at the moment, not so much. But it's the visa that you have to get in order to work. There's very little other option. I think there's like some business visas, but that wouldn't really be suitable for teaching. Yeah, so I would say the Z visa and then the resident permit are the way to go.
Yep, definitely. And I should mention that all of you guys, regardless of which school you go to, will have some sort of a supervisor or go-to person at the school who will be there kind of like to support you when you settle in, get things like your bank account set up, like residency permit, whatever needs to be done, police checks, health checks. There'll be someone appointed there to kind of help you, just kind of like what it was like for Lyndsay. So we have a few more questions. I'm conscious of the time, so we'll try and like zip through these.
Okay, speed run.
Robert asked, did you get job offers from other schools while you were there?
Hundreds, yes, hundreds every day. If you put your LinkedIn, if you put on your LinkedIn that you are an English teacher in China, you will get maybe 4 or 5 job offers a day, offering like astronomical money, but usually they're from recruiters who want to take a cut of that money. But yeah, I definitely got offered jobs just kind of walking around. If you look foreign, people will approach you and say, are you working for a school? Would you like to change jobs? Can we offer you a job? One of my friends from last year actually got offered a job. He met the principal of an international school on a night out in a club and got offered a job through that. But yeah, you definitely get offered other jobs. I'm not sure program specifically how easy it is for you guys to change schools. I know it involves changing your visa and it's all a little complicated on that end. My agency allowed us to change schools within the agency, but did not allow us to leave the agency to change schools. They were very like, they kept our documents, so it's a little difficult. But obviously it's a different, if you're not going through an agency, you have a lot more freedom, I guess. So yeah.
Nice, definitely. I've also been approached by numerous recruiters.
You'll be walking through a mall and they'll just like grab you and be like, do you teach English? And you're like, yes.
I already have a job though.
I already have a job, I'm very happy, thank you.
Yeah, in terms of if you want to stay again another year and consider other schools, like you'll definitely be approached by other schools and
oh
really
yeah,
easy to find
100%.
people on LinkedIn if that's something you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Robert also asked, do you think doing the CELTA qualification beforehand, if you did it beforehand, if that would have helped you when teaching in China?
Yes and no. So yes, I did the CELTA just because I feel like I had such a lack of like methodology training and like I just always kind of felt like I have no idea what I'm doing in China. The TEFL qualification that my agency put me through was not worth the paper it was written on. There are better ones, there are worse ones. I'm sure the one that you guys go through is very accredited because Pagoda Projects has no reason not to do that. They work with the Chinese government, and so, but my one was terrible. It was a bunch of PDFs. The CELTA, I think it does have a lot of value. My personal plan was to take the CELTA. I did it in Valencia, and then I wanted to teach in Spain, but obviously with Brexit, that hasn't worked out. But I definitely feel now I am more employable as a teacher. If I wanted to return to China, I would be looking at getting a lot more money. I'm a lot more qualified. I have a lot more experience. Yeah, I think I definitely like learned a lot, but I wouldn't say it was essential. Teaching in China, it was a really steep learning curve, and it took me a while to find my feet, but eventually I did. And there was a lot of support at my school. They want you to succeed, so I never, I felt like the only thing I was missing was like sort of a professionalism in my teaching, and a sort of methodological approach, which was provided for me through the CELTA. But I wouldn't say it's necessary by any means to do the CELTA before going to teach in China. They definitely don't expect it of you in China. I think the only thing that's required is really like a TEFL certificate. Yeah,
pretty much. So for this program that we're doing, it's 1 to 2 week online TEFL that's specific to mainland China.
Yes.
But I think the big help will be the 2 week of teacher training in Beijing, where you'll be in person. You guys will be able to meet each other as well, and have some more hands-on training as well before you go over. But a lot of teaching, it will be like, you won't know until you start it really, but I wouldn't worry about it too much, just because thousands and thousands of people have been through the exact same thing.
Yes.
One thing I want to quickly mention before we wrap up is, you might have seen in the chat something about London event tickets. So in 2 weeks' time, we are coming down to London for an in-person event. This is open to those of you who have already applied, who are thinking of applying. And essentially it's to kind of, again, go over the program, go over any questions, do a bit of networking. You guys might be able to meet each other as well. There'll be some drinks and nibbles provided. So if you are in the London area, and it's also a free event as well, and you fancy meeting some other people who are interested in the program, do feel free to come along. I'll pop the link again. It's on the Eventbrite, as well as Lyndsay's Instagram. But yeah, it'd be great to see some of you there. I might be coming, but Becca, for those of you who have spoken to Becca, is definitely going, and we'd love to see you there. So do feel free to sign up and pop along if you are available then. I'll ask one more question while I've still got you here. So anonymous attendees asked, what was the best part of your experience? A nice sort of cheesy one.
Oh, a nice one to end on. Oh my gosh, it's so hard to pick just one thing, but I think, yeah, the people that I was able to meet through this experience are, like absolute godsends. They are the nicest people, whether they were my Chinese colleagues, my students, my foreign colleagues. I was just surrounded by so much love, and it was such a positive experience for me, really from start to finish. And the people that I was able to meet are really like lifelong friends now. I miss my friends so much when I don't see them for so long. But yeah, I think the people were by far the best part of the experience for me. Yeah, cheesy answer for a cheesy question.
Yeah, lovely. But yeah, thank you so much, Lyndsay, for this, and thank you to everyone who joined as well. To those of you who are listening back, thanks as well for tuning in. If you have any questions about the program specifically, feel free to get in touch with me. If you want to ask Lyndsay any more questions about her experience, what it was like, do feel free to reach out to her on her Instagram.
Follow.
But yeah, thanks so much, guys, and we'll be doing some other events in the future, maybe about applications and whatnot. Just a reminder that the final deadline is March 25th. Anything submitted after then we cannot accept. So thanks again, and if you need any help, you know where to find us. But enjoy your weekend, guys. Bye.
Thank you for coming.